Session 4 on stars, ISM, and galaxy. So, in this session, we have five speakers, including one invited talk. So, invited talk is a 30 minutes. So, Bharat, can you share your slides?
Yeah, sure. Can you see my slides?
Yeah. So, the first talk is by Bharat Kumar Ira. Uh, he'll be talking on evolution of lithium in low mass stars and observational perspective. Bharat, we can start the talk, please.
Thank you. It's not there. Yeah, I'll keep for a few minutes and then at first, thanks to organizers for giving, for inviting to present this work. I'll be speaking on lithium and Loma stars. The lithium you could see here is like the third element in the periodic table. So the lithium is produced in Big Bang along with hydrogen and helium. It also produced in various sources that you see here, cosmic rays, novae, supernovae, and stars. So lithium is one of the important elements in astrophysics because of its sensitivity to the temperature. Because of that, it poses various anomalies in these sources that you see here. So it acts as a tracer to understand the various non-standard processes. So here, I will be focusing on Loma stars. So I move to the Loma stars evaluation. This is the general evolution of Loma stars. You could see main sequence moves to the red giant branch, and then it goes to the horizontal branch. And from horizontal branch to the AGB, and then post AGB, and then moves to the planetary nebulae and this white dwarfs. And this is a bigger picture of Loma stars evolution. When you zoom in, you see the solar type star, which is hydrogen burning at the core, will move to the giant branch where hydrogen converts into helium, and it became a degenerate. And the fuel comes from the shell where hydrogen is burning. And then it moves to the huge giant at the tip of the giant branch. And then it moves down in the luminosity, which is like burning helium at the core, is called a red clump star. So you will be hearing these phases in coming slides. So let us come to the actual observational data here. So these are the observational points that you see in the plot of lithium observations and from metal poor star to the metal rich stars that you see in the x-axis. The 0 to negative metallicity indicates going back in time. So the lithium, you could see clearly that lithium has evolved and it enriched in the galaxy. So I have shown all the various sources, that is possible contaminators or possible the possible sources that might have enriched the galaxy and that made lithium rich next generation stars. So among cosmic rays, supernovae, novae, and giants, and I'll be focusing on red giants, how the lithium in red giants. You see, back in 1940, that was the first lithium detection in red giants. And you can see here the green line, the first evidence of the presence of lithium outside the Earth and Sun. So it is possible because the spectral line of lithium is quite weak in Sun. And like sun-like stars in the main sequence, you could hardly see the line in the spectra, unless it is high resolution spectrum. So it is possible that people could only see in 40s or something, there's a doublet of lithium at 6708. So later in 1970, the Cameron and Fowler, they proposed a mechanism how the lithium can form inside the stars, that is through helium-3 through beryllium. So this is the important mechanism that helps to understand how this lithium is produced inside the stars, or where you have helium-3, rich in helium-3 or helium-4. So the lithium in low mass giants, you could see that when in the x-axis, when the stars moves from main sequence to the giant branch, and the lithium depletion occurs, and it has a factor of 30 to 50. So this is what generally you expect, that the stars moves from main sequence and the lithium goes down. So in 1980s, you could see here that there is strong lithium line, which is not expected in spectra, where in general case, you hardly see any line here. So this was a surprise that time in 80s, and then it became a challenge to the standard stellar evolutionary models, how to explain this anomaly. So the anomaly is clearly seen in these diagrams, in these plots, and you see most of the sample here in green and blue, they are well below a certain value of 1.4, which is expected for red giants, and only a small fraction of stars showing the anomaly here. So these are all the disk stars, and it is very clear in the halo stars too, that you have a globular cluster where lithium goes down when it moves from a main sequence to a giant branch. This is the general picture of lithium evolution, but you see a fraction of a few stars showing the anomaly. So the definition for this anomaly has come in 89 survey by Brown, and they have given a definition: any star with the lithium abundances is more than 1.4 dec is lithium rich, and you see only a 1 to 2% of stars are showing this anomaly. And it is evident in all part of the galaxy. So only 1 to 2% stars showing lithium rich in the galaxy. And then some people try to explain or try to understand the connection between the lithium enrichment and the mass loss mechanism, because when the star releases the mass, then it could reach to the galaxy, and then it can enrich the next generation stars. So they tried to find a connection between these two, but it's quite weak. So then the third point is to understand that where the stars on the stellar evolutionary. So that was the main point, main study to understand its evolutionary phase. So because of this Hipparcos parallaxes, Charbonnel and Palchandran could put these samples on the HR diagram, which is very important, which segregate the stars of high mass and the stars which falls on the AGB. It has been separated. And you see the low mass RGB, low mass lithium with stars falls in a very narrow location. And they considered it to be a luminosity pump on RGB. So based on these observations, it has many theory. It has been various suggestions for this origin, and many theoreticians looked into it. For example, the nucleosynthesis, lithium produced through nucleosynthesis, and some non-standard mixings, or the planets with a high amount of lithium, like Earth, engulfs into the star and become stars lithium rich. And another scenario is that combination of this external and internal mechanism. So these are all the suggestions, and various theoreticians, various models have come out, and I'm not going to detail into the theory. But in the Hipparcos era, you see that in 2000, this lithium richness was associated to the RGB pump. And in the next decade, a systematic survey of 2000 samples from a small telescopes suggested that these narrow occupation of these lithium-rich giants may belongs to the red clump, which the suggested origin is that lithium could be produced at a core helium flash at our RGB tip. So what is this helium flash is like, okay, the sun-like star climb all along the RGB, and it reaches to the tip of the RGB where the degeneracy of helium could be removed, and it's in a short span, the luminosity comes down and settles as a core helium burning star. And it stays for a longer time, for 100 million years or so, and then it moves to the further phases. All this study possible, all the above study is possible because of the identification of these lithium-rich giants from the low resolution spectra. Because generally we get a lithium abundances from the very high resolution spectra using spectral synthesis and atmospheric models. But here we observed a low resolution spectra, so we need to use some methodology where lithium and calcium lines are used, and the ratio of the lines reduce the relation between the ratio of the lines and the lithium abundances from the high resolution spectrum. And these relations help to derive the lithium abundances more or less accurately within 0.3 terasyra bars. This helped in the when the future large scale surveys are available, and millions of low resolution spectra available from LAMOST kind of survey. So this is a LAMOST survey where your low resolution spectra of 1800 is available. Now moderate resolution is available now. And the Kepler provides photometry and seismology, and Gaia provides astrometry. And Gala and Apogee provides elemental abundances from a high resolution spectroscope. So basically, in further, I will show you that how the lithium issues has been worked out using this large scale surveys. So this large scale surveys helped from hundreds to increase the lithium rich giants number from hundreds to thousands. You see here from 82, it's slowly, it is going like only in hundreds, few hundreds. But when this large scale surveys like Gala and LAMOST comes in, it just to the thousands. So that's fine. The number is increasing, but we also need to understand much more in detail, like its evolutionary phase, and also the combination of spectroscopy and the seismology helped to confirm the previous suggestion of Kumar Pleven that some of the stars belongs to the red clump region. And you see in the left-hand diagram delta nu and delta pi, where you could separate the helium degeneracy stars versus helium burning stars. So they found one star which is core helium burning and having a lithium abundance of 2.8. Okay, this is the first star that confirmed that, okay, lithium rich stars belongs to the red clump phase. And further, we found two super lithium rich stars, which super lithium rich means the stars having a lithium abundance more than the ISM abundance from where the stars born. So you see the spectroscopy, the lithium comes from spectroscopy, and other elements like carbon isotopic ratios, which is sensitive to the mixing parameters, which comes from the Apogee. So, and the astrometry comes from Gaia, and seismology comes from Kepler. It's a combination of this provides that, okay, and the two super lithium rich stars associated with the core helium burning phase. And not only in the field and in cluster also, there's a one detection of super lithium rich star. So along with the seismology, there is another technique was tried that carbon to nitrogen ratios to differentiate the stars from RGB to red clump star. And here is also like spectroscopy and the Gaia help to resolve these two stars belongs to the red clump phase. So 1, 2, 3, there's a very few number of stars are discovering. So then there's a systematic study happened between LAMOST and Kepler fields, and for a huge number of samples. And then surprisingly, we found that almost all the super lithium rich stars belong to the red clump. None of the star was found in the RGB phase. And the left side is like the technical, like how these period spacings are calculated, and I'm not going to detail about it. But this particular study helped that, okay, this low mass lithium rich stars are really belongs to the red clump. So along with this study, so there are various other studies supported, like based on astroseismology plus spectroscopy, and some studies astrometry plus spectroscopy. All the studies came to a conclusion that, okay, all or most lithium-rich stars belong to the red clump. Okay, so now we understand that, okay, most of this or all stars belong to the red clump. Then we started looking the lithium in the red clump stars. So we found that, I mean, the previous statement says that, okay, lithium-rich stars belong to the red clump, but how this evolution of lithium happens in the red clump star. So what we have used all the existing lab surveys like GALA plus Gaia plus LAMOS plus Apogee. We have utilized them. And this precise stellar spectroscopic stellar atmosphere parameters comes from GALA, which really helps to go ahead with this issue. And you see in the figure, it's a well-populated places which anybody can understand that one could be the hydrogen burning phase and another could be the helium burning phase, which is expected because any star stays a longer time in these two phases. So we made a small box to take the red clump stars, and then we use the inferred astroseismic parameters in delta nu and delta p diagram to understand any contamination with the red giant branch stars, and it comes out to be less than 10%. And also we checked their lithium abundances with the other surveys and with the other estimations, and they comes out to be within very good less sigma. Also, we checked some red clump stars between Gaia ESO survey and the LAMOS RC star. So this entire study actually ended up with a fruitful results, and which are here, and this figure will explain the entire evolution of lithium in the low mass stars. So let me start here with the axis. In the y-axis, the luminosity is going up, which means that the star is moving from main sequence to the giant branch, and the luminosity is going up. And in the x-axis, the lithium is going down. So you see here a blob, and you have a quite range here in the main sequence, which which tells you that lithium might be depleted in pre-main sequence phase or in the main sequence phase. So what it tells, when the star moves from pre-main sequence to the main sequence, there is a possibility of lithium depletion. For example, Sun has a lithium of 1, and it has depleted from 3.3. So it tells that lithium gets distracted even until reaching the main sequence turn-off phase. And from here, you see that the star is moving towards giant branch, where you have a first dredge up. During the first dredge up, it leaves molecular discontinuity, and it reaches to the luminosity bump. So during this first dredge up, the lithium also gets depleted. So when it reaches to the luminosity bump, you will see the post-luminosity bump, it's further depletes. So this is quite agreement between the observations, and you have a model that the lithium keeps depleting slowly until it reaches to the RGB tip. So it's going much down from 3 to -1. It's of a fourth magnitude, it's going down. So when the star is further moving towards the red clump phase, so you can expect amount of lithium could be as low as -1. And this is the model shows that, okay, even in the red clump phase, the lithium further goes down. So this is what you expect, but surprisingly, you can see it very clearly that all this red colors are. So all this red clump stars showing a huge range of lithium abundances and is much, much higher than what you will expect. And the distribution, once you consider, the peak of the distribution is coming around 0.7, which is much, much higher than -0.9. So it clearly tells that the entire distribution of red clump stars says that almost all the red clump stars are enhanced in lithium. This is the field stars. Even the sample from the clusters, open clusters, you'll see this diamonds, which also the peak values are close to the value that we see here. And you will see there is a one black dot here that is like those stars are having accurate evolutionary phases from astroseismology. So which tells you that your peak value is somewhat agreement between the field stars, and the stars are having very accurate evolutionary phases from astroseismology, which is independent way of getting their luminosities and the clusters. So it's a very good agreement between all this sample. So that indicates and it confirms that almost all the red clump stars are enhanced with lithium. So basically the classical definition that we see here is like 1.5. That is what we use the definition so far. And we cut those stars, even for the red giant branch stars or red clump stars, any stars, we use the definition. So from this study, you can clearly see that if you are defining any lithium red stars and red clump or so, and you should use the definition of this -0.9 or so. And so this new definition brings out a huge range of lithium abundances in red clump stars of around the 5 magnitude. So still we need. So this results will open up various challenges that what is the reason for this huge 5 magnitude range of the lithium abundances in red clump stars, and how it evolves inside, in the phase of red clump, because the red clump phase is around 100 million years. And here, you can see the model here that there is something is happening as close to the RGB tip. Okay, so such things will open up various questions to the modelers that, okay, how this lithium gets produced in the tip, or it's happening during the red clump. So there are various things need to be worked out maybe in this coming decade. So the conclusion here is like, okay, you see that all the red clump stars are enhanced. That tells that almost all the stars on the LOMA stars has to go through this phase, has to go through the RGB tip, and they have to experience a core helium flash, and they have to settle down in red clump. So there's a possibility that almost all LOMA stars goes through this lithium production phase. So this is the result got from the study. And if I summarize, the strong lithium line in red giant spectra was observed in 1940s and 1980s. The rarity of 1 to 2% lithium-rich LOMAS giants observed for 3 decades, but there is no agreement between observations and stellar evolution models. a lot of efforts undergone to pinpoint their evolutionary phases, either RGB bump and or red clump. It's a decade effort, the combination of seismology, large spectroscopic surveys, and astrometry surveys confirm that the most or all Lomas stars, Lomas lithium-rich stars, belongs to the red clump. So then it helped to initiate a dedicated study of lithium and red clump stars. So then the new definition is introduced for lithium richness and found all red clump stars are lithium enhanced, and all Lomas stars are, that tells that all Lomas stars produce lithium in late stage of their lives. I would say that it's not the end of this issue, but it's a new beginning, because now it's time to work out how the timing of the lithium production and its evolution and its effect on further evolutionary phases like AGB, and further in post-AGB stars, and you will find some of the stars are enhanced. So it's a new beginning, and the need to work on the next decade. People will be working on this. Overall, to justify the title of this talk, the evolution of lithium in Lomas stars, the story looks like lithium may fit for the destruction until the end of RGB, and the production during post-RGB. So I was telling about red clump stars now, and we also know that the novae. So these are all post-RGB stars. So many thanks to collaborators who involved in most of these works, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Bharat, for completing your talk well within the time. Nice work and a good talk. So now you have a time to take up a couple of questions. Please raise up your hand. Okay. Yeah. Here from, yes, please unmute yourself, Kanti Jyotinya. Please unmute yourself and ask the question. Kuntal, can you make him the unmute?
Yeah, we are trying to, but they're not responding.
Yeah, Kanti is not responding. Yes.
Okay. So
we can ask him to type his question in the
Kanti, can if you are unable to unmute yourself, then type the questions on chat box. Even then in the Slack channel, you can also ask the question. Yes.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Then if in the chat, okay. So there are no hands raised up. So I again thanks to Bharat for the nice talk.
Thank you.
So I'll go to the second speaker. Santi Priya. So we'll be talking on period variation in active flaring binary VX triangulum, magnetic activity cycle or tertiary companion. Santi Priya, now share your slides and go ahead, please.
Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible now.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Jeevan. Yeah. So good afternoon, one and all. Before I present my talk, I would like to thank ASI for giving me this opportunity. So I'm here today to present my work on period variations in active flaring binary BX tree. And we are seeing the possible reasons for that period variations. So to begin with, let's see what is a stellar flare. So stellar flares are sudden intense outbursts in stellar atmospheres, which give out hot material into the space. So the flares last for a few minutes to few hours. Statistical studies of these flares have shown high occurrence of flare events in M-type stars, and these systems are observed to show some strong correlations among flare energy, its durations, and amplitude. So specifically, the strong interactions between the components of binary systems generate magnetic activity. So this activity, which is seen, is extended beyond chromosphere, that is in the upper layers of the stellar atmosphere. Coming to flares, they are not only detectable in UV and X-rays, but also in visible part of electromagnetic spectrum, thus making them act as good proxy for stellar activity. Now, the amount of bolometric energy released by each of the flare event, as mentioned here, is around 10 to the power of 24 to 10 to the power of 27 joules. Thus, it becomes a suitable indicator for stellar activity. Sorry. So especially it is observed that in low mass closed binaries, flaring activity is seen to be a common feature. However, there is a discrepancy between observations and theoretical models with respect to the stellar parameters and magnetic activity. Now, these low mass binaries are mostly known to host third bodies, and study of such systems will help us to build proper models of dynamo theory to determine precise physical parameters and evolutionary status. Along with, and also it helps us in understanding planetary evolution and habitability. Now, all these scenarios which I have shown you here motivated us to carry out flare studies on binaries. First step towards it was a study of BX tree and comparing the results of the same with a few M-type or low mass binaries. So coming to the object of interest, BX tree. BX tree was first identified as a short variable star, and later was classified to be a WMR type of binary. The angular separation between two components of this binary is around 1.28 solar radii, with an orbital period as shown here is around 0.19 days, making it one of the closest known close binary, and it is also termed as ultra short period binary. Now, the basic information of this system is given in this slide. As I've conveyed earlier, we wanted to study a flare activity on M-type systems. Thus, we revisited BX tree, which has been studied to show spots, flares, and decreasing period. And we tried to carry out a detailed study focusing on flaring activity and correlation between activity cycle and third bodies, if any. So here we listed out other M-type binaries that we have chosen for our studies. The parameters are mentioned here. All these four the binaries we have used for our comparative study. As you see here, all are short period binaries with spectral type M. So to carry out our study further, we have collected data from databases like TESS, ASAS, and SuperVASP, HATNet, and NSVS. The major contribution for the results is from TESS data, as most of the flaring and period variation studies were done using the TESS data. Now, as I've told period variation studies, I present you the details of period variation studies that we have carried out. These are all the binaries that we have studied. So here I have listed out all the times of minima that are collected, as major contribution is from TESS, and corresponding is the period range, observation period range, and then period of the binaries of the study. Now in the last column, the eclipse time variations, also known to be as O minus C variations, are found to be showing some period changes in the binaries that we have selected, and the nature of the variation observed is as shown in the last column here. So as I've told that they have been showing the period variation, I would like to show you the graphical representation of the same. So here the O minus C, in this graphical representation, I show you the O minus C curve of BX tree. It is observed that BX tree shows a secular decrease superimposed with a sinusoidal change. So in the earlier studies, the period decrease was detected. Mostly it can be due to only limited observations that were available. So moving on, the next object of the study was GJ3236. It is seen that it has showed some secular decrease in the period from the best fit we could get. Then V405 and showed a secular decrease again, superimposed with a sinusoidal trend similar to that of BX tree. Moving on, the next object, Thor 42. Here we had very limited observations from TESS for this object, and the best fit showed a secular increase in the period. So these are the variation plots, and from these variations that we have observed, we calculated parameters, and the calculated parameters are listed in this table. So here, for the binaries which are showing, so this is the variation that we observed, period variation, dp by dt. And for the objects which have showed sinusoidal variation, we calculated third body parameters. Along with that, we also have calculated quadrupole moment, delta Q, and angular momentum loss to check whether the period variation is due to presence of third body or magnetic activity cycle. So from the calculations, we found that delta Q values seem to be much smaller than the typical values that we observe for active stars. So from that, we conclude that the cyclic variations are either only due to presence of the third body, or it can be due to combination of magnetic activity or presence of a third body. So the M3 value, that is the mass of the third body for BX tree, was calculated to be around 0.06 solar masses, which equals to approximately 60 Jupiter masses. And similarly, we observed a similar result for GUBU, which showed around 0.05 mass for the third body. And this appears to be an interesting result for our future observations, for any future observations that can be carried out. So moving on from this period variation study is one aspect, and the other aspect is a study of flaring activity. So moving on from period variation to flaring activity. So here I present a sample flare for each object that we have studied for this study. And so all these flares we have we have obtained it from test photometric data. So to study the flare activity that we are doing here, we used the regular conventional method to filter all available data and identified the flare event, which includes selection of the flare lasting for few minutes and containing more than one data point, and also the amplitude of the flare peak being no less than 3 times the photometric error. So here I have shown you the images of flare activity, one of the prominent flare activity in each of the stars. So this is for BX3. Further, to verify the identification of the flare event was also performed through visual inspection. This is a flare event of V405, and you can see few flares which are there here. Then Thor 42, here you can see 2 flares which are observed. Next is Jiubu. This is the flare that is observed here. So from these flares that are detected here, we try to measure frequency of flares. So frequency of flares per hour, then range of fractional flare frequency, and duration of flare, along with the occurrence of this flares, occurrence rate per day. It was very interesting to see that BX3 has been found to be showing large occurrence rate of micro flares, whereas GJ3236 in that with its least occurrence rate showed a very strong flare. So since flares are most readily observed in UV X-ray bands, the fact that they have been detected in lower pass bands in the current study that we have taken up, it suggests that they are highly energetic, and the studied objects are magnetically very active systems. So moving ahead, so in order to understand the nature of the flares that we have seen, their variation was recorded and is plotted as shown here. So here the x-axis shows fractional flux
So
of the
Antipriya,
flare.
you have only 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try to wind up.
Yeah.
Fractional flux of the flare, and y-axis shows the rise, decay, and total time duration of each flare. So we observed shorter rise times, and I'll just show you quickly the plots. It is for GJ3236, V405, and Thor 42, GUBU. So we observed shorter rise times and longer decay times in all the binaries of the current study, which is a typical nature of any stellar flaring activity. Next, here, in order to compare the current study with the Kepler flaring binaries that was studied by Huang et al. 2020, we have plotted the fractional flux. The fractional flux detected, fractional flux of the strongest flare detected in each binary with their corresponding orbital period. The distribution of Kepler objects follows a power law, and we observe that GJ3236 followed the same. The inset image here shows the fit performed on the strongest flare detected in GJ3236 from test data. Rest of the 4 binaries showed very low fractional flux, which could be due to limited observations during their low magnetic activity period. Like other, now we also observed in another inset here, we also observed quasi-periodic oscillations like flares observed on Sun. Quasi-periodic oscillations were seen in GJ3236 after the flare. So to summarize, the work presented here is preliminary, and we propose to continue the same that may lead to better understanding on magnetic activity and activity cycles in M-type binaries, especially hosting tertiary objects. Now, the results of the same are under preparation for publication, and I would like to thank DST for supporting part of my work, and also ASI for giving me the opportunity. Thank you all. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Santi. Now we have time for a quick questions, one or two. Please raise your hands. Okay. If not, I have a quick question that while doing your OM-NSC analysis, you have very limited data points. So concluding from this limited data points is rather tough. For example, even if the apart from the BX tree, that I don't see it, right?
Yes, yes. We are actually trying to collect more data, and this, just as I've told, this is only preliminary work.
Yeah.
We are we have collected the data, and that has to be incorporated still.
Right. Okay. The other thing is that deduction of the flare that you said that so you will be taking only one more than 1 points. That means minimum 1 points are you taking for occurrence of the flare there?
No, no, more than 1 point.
More than 1 point. That means 2 points minimum.
It can be 2 or more.
Yeah, that's minimum 2 points, right?
Yeah, minimum 2.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if anybody have any queries, please go to Slack channel, as well as you can ask here till the session is here. So I'll move to the next speaker. Next speaker is Susmita.
Hello. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Susmita is around, right? So
Right.
Susmita is talking about period luminosity and period radius relation of for MASA computed BL-HER of models. Now, Susmita, please go ahead.
Right. Is my screen
Yes.
visible?
Yes, it's your screen is visible and you are audible.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sushmita from the University of Delhi. My talk today is based on our paper that has been recently published in MNRAS. We present a new theoretical framework for BL-HER stars and derive new multiwavelength period luminosity and period radius relations. This work has been done in collaboration with Professor H.P. Singh, my PhD supervisor, Professor Shashi Kanpur, Dr. Vedek Smolek, Dr. Anupam Bhardwaj, and Dr. Marina Rejkuba. So to begin with, the object of our interest are BL-HER stars. They belong to the class of pulsating variable stars, similar to the other well-known pulsating variables, which are RR-Lyrae and classical Cepheids. These stars also follow well-defined period luminosity relations, as a result of which they may be used as useful distance indicators. So why are we interested in these particular objects? This is because unlike RR-Lyrae and classical Cepheids, where we find significant effect of metallicity on PL relations, there has been empirical evidence that shows that the dependence of PL relations is significantly weak or negligible on metallicity. For this work, we study BL-HER stars from a theoretical perspective. We do this by computing a very fine grid of stellar pulsation models using MESA-RSP. We obtain theoretical multiwavelength PL and PR relations, and thereby we study the effect of metallicity and convection parameters on these theoretical relations. Here is an animation of a pulsating variable. We can see how the luminosity changes during a pulsation cycle. So if we were to plot a light curve, we would see a periodic variation of magnitude or brightness with time. Here we have the HR diagram showing different classes of pulsating variables in different evolutionary stages. Our objects of interest lie on the classical instability strip. So as can be seen from here, type 2 Cepheids lie intermediate to RR-Lyrae and classical Cepheids. Therefore, type 2 Cepheids are brighter than RR-Lyrae stars, but fainter than classical Cepheids. The subclasses of type 2 Cepheids are BL-HER stars, W Virginis, RV Tauri. In addition, we also have the peculiar W Virginis stars. So ideally, we would have wanted to compute theoretical models for BL-HER as well as W Virginis, but owing to the current limitations of MESA RSP code, which can reliably only model the shorter period type 2 Cepheids, we decided to go ahead with BL-HER stars only with our for our project. So MESA is an open source code, and we can play around with a lot of free parameters. As was mentioned earlier, we are interested in studying the effect of convection parameters on our theoretical relations. And therefore, we make use of 4 convection parameter sets with increasing complexity as we move from set A to set B, the parameters of which are listed in this table. We begin with linear computations. To compute a very fine grid of models, the input parameters that go into the computations are metallicity, stellar mass, stellar luminosity, and effective temperature. We have 7 different chemical compositions. Stellar mass varies from 0.5 to 0.8 stellar solar mass. Stellar luminosity varies from 50 to 300 in steps of 50 solar luminosity. As can be seen from here, the effective temperature range of 4,000 to 8,000 Kelvin is quite broad compared to the width of the classical instability strip. Such a wide range has been used to accurately estimate the edges of the instability strip. So all of these resulted in a combination of 20,412 models per convection set. We use the condition that after the linear stability analysis, models with positive growth rate, models that show a positive fundamental growth rate, using those models, we can accurately estimate the edges, the blue and the red edges of the instability strip. The dashed lines here are constant lines showing a period of 1 to 4 days. So the area of intersection from this plot are essentially the models that we want to go ahead with the nonlinear computations, which is around the number of 4,000. So when we proceed with the nonlinear computations, we can obtain a plot similar, obtain similar plots for all of the nonlinear models computed, which show the variations for all the 4 convection sets. So for our analysis, we want to proceed with only those models that satisfy the condition of full amplitude stable pulsations. So that condition is satisfied when the amplitude of radius, when the fluctuation of radius amplitude, the pulsation period, and the gamma value do not vary by more than 0.01 for the last 100 cycles for the total 4,000 cycles that we had computed. So for this particular example, the models computed with set A, B, and C clearly satisfy the condition of full amplitude stable pulsation, whereas we reject the model computed with set D because they do not show stability. So using all of these constraints, the final number of models that has been used for our analysis is given in the last column for all the 4 sets. So this is only one, so we are left with 1/10 of the number we had started with. So here is an example of the multi-wavelength light curve over the different wavelengths. Here we present the multi-wavelength period luminosity relations for the convection parameter set A. Similar plots are also obtained for the other 3 convection sets B, C, and D. The different colored lines here show different chemical compositions. So if you notice, if you check the wavelength U and B, we find that there is a clear dependence of PL relation on metallicity, whereas as we go to higher wavelengths, we find negligible effect of metallicity, negligible or weak effect of metallicity on the PL relations. This is in agreement with what had been empirically found from recent results. Here we show how the slope of the period radius relations vary. So from this plot, we can see that set A and C show statistically similar PR slopes, while set B and D show statistically similar slopes. However, all the 4 sets of convection are in good agreement with recent empirical results, as well as from previous theoretical models. when we test for metallicity, we find that there is a weak dependence of PR relation on metallicity. So to summarize, the models that had been computed with sets P and D show statistically similar slopes for both PL and PR, while set A and C exhibit similar slopes. Most empirical relations match well with all the 4 sets of convection, although we do find the 4 convection sets to show differences among each other. An exception to this are the BL-Hur stars in LMC, where we found that sets B and D match better with empirical relations in the H and K bands. When we study the period luminosity relation, we found the effect of metallicity to be significant in U and B, but much weaker in the higher wavelengths. And this is consistent with the previous recent empirical data. We also find a weak dependence of PR relations on metallicity for all the 4 sets of convection parameters. This is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Susmita.
Yep.
Completing your talk well within a time. So you have a time for a couple of questions.
Yes.
Okay. Please raise your hand. Otherwise, type your questions on the chat box. So if not, then I have only one small question. So why this PL relation
Yes.
is more dependent on the luminosity in the U band rather than the lateral wavelengths?
The output that we have from MESA, they are bolometric light curves. So we make use of model atmospheres to convert all of these bolometric light curves into separate wavelengths. So MESA already provides. So what we found, also it has been there from previous literature. It's that the effect of metallicity is more at the shorter
wavelength.
Yeah. So the bolometric correction is more sensitive to metallicity at U and B. So it has to do with the how there is an effect of adopted model atmospheres on the transformation of bolometric light curves.
Okay. It doesn't depend any physical conditions, something like that. Like in U band that you are showing that, so therefore the different metallicity, the slopes are different.
Right.
While going to the I band, it's almost constant for all metallicities.
Yes, right. So for empirical results, we have empirical results for near infrared, so mainly JHK. So there we do not find any, even from empirical as well as theoretical, there is negligible dependence of PL on metallicity. However, from the theoretical side, we have not, there has not been UND relations empirically that we could have compared with. But from what we said was that the metallicity effect becomes significant in UNB because the bolometric corrections are more sensitive to metallicity at shorter wavelengths.
Okay, if there are no questions, so thank you, Susmita, again.
Thank you.
Please answer your talk.
Yes.
So I'll move to next talk by Najma. Najma is there?
Yeah, she's there.
She's there. Okay. So the next talk is by
Hello.
Najma. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Please share your slides.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah. So we'll be talking on detection of millihertz frequency break in weak low/hard state. Weak low/hard state of GX339-4 using AstroSat data. So Najma, now please go ahead.
Yes. Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes, I can see your slide.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nazma Hussain. I'm a PhD student at Jamia Millia Islamia University. The top title of my talk is Low Frequency Break Detection in Weak Low Hard State of GX3394 using AstroSat data. This work is in collaboration with Professor Ranjeev Misra from IUCAA and Dr. Samashri Sreen from Jamia Millia Islamia University. So let me begin by outlining the talk. First, I'll talk about what are black hole binary systems, and then about the source that we have selected. then about the data that we have used from AstroSat, and then the spectral and timing results that we have obtained. And then we'll talk about break frequency and truncated disk model. And then finally, we are going to conclude by summarizing the results. So let me begin with the introduction part. So what is a black hole binary system? It's a system consisting of a black hole and a companion star orbiting about their common center of mass. And this black hole, due to its enormous gravitational force, accretes matter from the companion star, as can be seen in this picture on the right-hand side, that the black hole at the center is accreting mass from this giant companion star. And since this matter is falling in this gravitational potential of the black hole, then this gravitational energy gets released, and some part of its energy is reached to us. And we observe that this energy is mostly in X-rays. Therefore, these systems are also known as X-ray binary systems. These systems are further divided into two categories: low mass X-ray binary and high mass X-ray binary, depending upon the size of the companion star. So if the size of the companion star is, say, 1 solar mass, then they are termed as low mass X-ray binary. And if it's greater than 1 solar masses, then they are termed as high mass X-ray binaries. So what do we think of the accretion flow? Like, what picture do we have in mind? This comes from the spectra that we have observed. So what we observe for these systems is that their spectra consist of multiple components, rather than just one disk black body radiation coming from the disk. So from here we get this picture that this is one of the most famous pictures of the flow. So there is this accretion disk here, and then this disk ends somewhere, and then another flow replaces the disk. Sometimes it's referred to as corona, and sometimes it's referred to as hot inner flow. And what happens is that some part of this disk photons might end up in the corona and get Comptonized. And therefore, we get this Comptonized spectrum, which peaks at higher energies. And then what can happen is that we get another reflection component in the spectrum, which might be arising because some part of the Comptonized photons might fall back into the disk and produce these reflection features, such as iron emission lines and Compton humps. So this is a picture of the accretion flow. Now moving to the source, it's a well-studied source, extensively studied source, and it was first observed in 1973. And it's a low-mass black hole binary, so its accretion is dominated by Roche-Loeb overflow mechanism. Also, its black hole mass is between 2.3 to 9.5 solar masses, and its distance is estimated to be greater than 5 kiloparsec. Also, since the time of its observation, there had been reports of multiple outbursts in every 2-3 years. This shows its transient nature. For example, here is the GS339 for maxi light curve in energy range 2 to 20 keV. And we see that it remains in quiet mode for a lot of time, and then it goes into these outbursts. Also, it shows some smaller outbursts here, which are known as failed outbursts. What are failed outbursts? I will talk about that. So what we see is that during this journey, or throughout this outburst, the spectral and timing features associated with the source changes. And this is a typical case for most of the black hole binary systems. So what we see is in the hardness intensity diagram is that when the source is starting in the outburst, then the hard photons are dominating. And so the Comptonized spectra is dominating. And as it moves in the outburst, it reaches some great luminosity, and then the hard photon contribution starts decreasing, and therefore we get domination of softest photons, and therefore we get these different states, which are hard states and soft states and some intermediate states in between. So hard state is the state where there's a domination of Comptonized components, or our spectra peaks at high energies, and soft state where there is domination of disk black body components, so our spectra peaks at lower energy range. So now coming to the observation of source with AstroSat. AstroSat observed it during a failed outburst. Failed outburst is the one where the source does not transit to soft states and remains in the hard state. So this was one such outburst when ASTROSAT observed it. It was at the this observation was conducted at the beginning of the outburst. Now coming to the data that we've used, ASTROSAT. ASTROSAT is India's first multi-wavelength satellite. It was launched in September 2015, and it has these 5 major components working in these different energy ranges, which can be seen here. And so it covers these broad range in X-ray, and then some part of it also covers the UV and visible infrared spectrum. LAX-PC and SXT, as can be seen together, they give this broad spectral coverage of 0.3 to 80 keV. And we know that these systems emit mostly in these soft and hard X-ray, therefore making this ideal case. Also, LAX-PC has a very good timing resolution of 10 microseconds. So whatever we are able to study the shorter time scales in the vicinity of the black hole using this detector. Now coming to the main part, the spectral and timing analysis. So we perform the basic spectral analysis by using and joint fitting the data of SXT and LAX-PC. And we see that our spectra could fit with an absorbed power law. Here, power law accounts for the Comptonization spectrum, and the TBAPS accounts for the interstellar medium absorption of these photons. And we see that the photon index for this power law was 1.6, which shows that it was in a hard state. Also, what we see is that there are still some features which are not modeled, and since this observation is was taken at a very low flux value, what we did was we added another model, which is the Rayline model in this iron line emission, which peaks at 6.4, 6.5 keV. So when we use that model, we see that the chi-square fit becomes better, and but we could not constrain a few parameters related to Rayline, and one of them was the inner disk radius. This was because our flux was really low, this observation. So the spectral fitting, we could say that the energy spectrum was well described by an absorbed power law of photon index 1.6, and the Eddington ratio was only 0.2%. Also, there were some residuals in these reflection regions. Therefore, addition of reflection components improved the chi-square fit, showing the presence of reflection components in the spectra. Now coming to the timing analysis, we did the timing analysis by studying the Fourier transform of light curve. So we generated these power density spectrum. This is just for example. So if we have a light curve, and for example, if we take the Fourier transform and then we do the amplitude square of the Fourier transform with appropriate normalization, then we get this power density spectrum. So we basically move from time to frequency domain. Then a typical power spectrum of a hard state for a black hole binary system looks like this. This is an example. So it covers this broad range of frequencies. This is known as the broadband noise. And then there are some special frequencies associated with it. For example, this is the break frequency below and above which the shape of the power spectrum changes. Similarly, this is the high break frequency, which is achieved at higher frequencies, and below and above which also the shape of the power spectrum changes. So with this, we generated the power density spectrum for these 3 different detectors of ASTROSAT, LAX-PC 10, 20, and SXT. And we find that all these power spectrum contains this broadband noise. And when we fit a broken power law model, we find that they all show a break at around 3 millihertz. So this is also one of the lowest break frequency that has been observed for this source till now. And so the power spectrum basically consists of this broadband noise, and it was validated by results from these 3 detectors. We could not fit the Lorentzians because there was no broad bumps like features. Therefore, we used a broken power law. Now, break frequency and truncated disk model. So as we talked before, this is one of the famous models, and most of the models that are coming use this geometry of the disk ending at some point. The disk ending at some point, and then is replaced by some another flow, which is known as the corona or hot inner flow. And as the luminosity of the state decreases, the disk moves away from the black hole, and therefore this hot inner flow starts dominating. So in this model, there are a few frequencies associated with this disk structure. So one of the lowest frequencies associated with is the viscous time scale at the truncation radius. And this expression is given here. It has already been found for the accretion disk. And this viscous time scale is nothing but the time the disk takes to diffuse matter in itself. So what we did was we used this expression and we put our observation value of the break frequency, and then we find with thin disk parameters that the truncation radius was coming out to be around 140 gravitational radii. So this was our estimation. We could not estimate the truncation radius using the spectral parameters, but we estimated it using the power density spectrum. So with this results and conclusion, the spectrum was fitted with an absorbed power law, and it was in a faint low Hart state as the luminosity was only 0.002 of the Eddington value. Addition of reflection components improved the fit, and the power spectrum for all these three detectors showed a break at 3 millihertz, and also we estimated the truncation radius to be around 140 gravitational radii. So with this, I would like to thank everyone, and especially the committee of ASI for giving me this opportunity of presenting my work here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Najma, for completing your talk well before the time. So we have a time of couple of questions.
Yes.
Please raise your hands. No. So I have a question that you are using the X-ray spectra up to only 12 kV, something like that?
Yes, sir, 20 kV.
It's 20 kV. Okay, so 20 kV. Then how are you dealing with this iron? This is iron line that we are observing because of the reflection and all.
Yes, well, this is what we have seen in earlier observations of the source, that there was an iron line at this frequency, but we could not constrain the modeling reflection components properly. Therefore, yeah.
So that is iron KL then, right?
Yes, right.
So that's what I'm saying. Then we are not using any reflection model, and
No, we use the reflection model.
this RE line.
Yes, RE line, but its parameters were not able to constrain because of the slow flux or the low count rate of the data. So we cannot we know that there is a presence of iron line, but we are not sure of the broadening or the
Second thing, that iron line, it looks like quite a broad here. So exactly, are you considering this iron K alpha, or maybe because along this, then you will get the iron complex line, actually iron K alpha, iron other lines along with this 6.9, 6.7 kV, along with the 6.4 kV.
Yes, sir. We tried to constrain the parameters, but we could not. So we cannot comment on how broad it is, or because the spectrum information that we have is not enough to deal with this question. Yeah. Probably with better counter, the source has been studied, and there has been a presence of iron line, and it's broadening with more flux. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else, please go ahead. I don't see any raised hands. So if you have any queries, please go to the Slack channel and chat box also. Although we have still time for the question. So if not, so thank you, Najma. Thanks once again. Please unshare your slides. So I'll go to next speaker. The next speaker is Anusha. So she'll be talking on identifications of new classical AE stars in galaxy using Lamos DR5. Anusha, now please share your slides.
Yeah.
And go ahead. Yeah, Anusha?
Yeah. Just a second.
Oh, you are doing it.
Yeah. my
Yeah.
slides visible?
Yes, yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anusha. I'm working as a research project assistant in the Department of Physics and Electronics with Dr. Blesson Matthew. And my talk today will be titled Identification of New Classical AE Stars in the Galaxy using LAMOS DR5. This presentation is based on a recent publication in MNRAS, and the project is being funded by SERB DST and Christ Deemed to be University. To begin with, before we move into classical AE stars, it is important that we have a good grasp on BE phenomena and classical BE stars. So the term classical BE stars is specifically designated to non-supergiant B-type stars, where the spectrum shows Balmer lines in emission at least once in their lifetime. These emission lines are forming from the circumstellar decretion disk around such type of stars. And the formation of such an equatorial decretion disk is what we call as the BE phenomena. So such a phenomena has been observed in addition to B-type stars. It can be extended to late O-type and early A-type stars as well. But if we look into the literature, we do observe that though there exist a good number of studies on disk formation ability of O-type stars, there is not much studies concerning the A-type stars showing BE phenomena. So our work specifically concentrate on the group of A-type stars forming decretion disk around. So these classical AE stars have been first defined by Jaschek et al. 1986 as A-type stars showing Balmer emission lines in their spectrum at least once in their lifetime. Now moving on to the observational characteristics of classical AE stars. Now, in the previous slide itself, we compared classical BE stars and AE stars. So, considering that A-type stars being cooler in nature compared to B stars, the number of emission lines forming from the disk of classical AE stars and the strength of the lines are expected to gradually decrease as we move from late B-type to early A-type stars. Under this consideration, as we observe the spectra, when we move from A0 to later spectral subtypes, most of the times we see only H alpha lines in emission and H beta is rarely observed in emission. The interesting feature here is that these emission lines do show variability in their profile, emission intensity, and line strength, which is directly related to the emission line forming regions surrounding these stars. Now, just like how classical BE stars does show infrared excess, anomalous infrared emission have been identified in AE stars as well. And BE stars are one of the most fastest rotators among different types of stars in the universe. In comparison, AE stars also do show a rotation rate at in the orders of about 250 kilometers per second. So all these observational characteristics thus give us a clue that BE phenomena can be found in classical AE type stars also. Though we have a good grasp about the observational properties, what is the need to study these type of stars? Now, Cranmer in 2005 identified that late B-type and early A-type stars have rotation rates at a closer proximity to their critical value, which means they can easily form a Keplerian disk around. But theoretically, we expect the frequency of AE stars to decrease as we move towards later spectral subtypes. So as an example, talking about A1, A2 type main sequence stars, empirically 3% of the stars are expected to show BE phenomena. But looking into the number of A1, A2 type classical AE stars account only to about 0.2%. Now, this number discrepancy and the time gap since the last time we studied clearly about these classical AE stars is what our work is trying to address. Now, the methodology that we have followed to identify classical AE stars, we have made use of the LAMOS data release by the A star catalog. Now, from the spectra made available by the A star catalog of LAMOS data release 5, we made use of automated Python routine to identify the emission peaks in and around H alpha within a wavelength band of about plus or minus 3 angstrom. Now, this substantially reduced the sample size And from here, we made sure that repeated observations of the same star, what we call as the multi-epoch data, have been excluded. And this results in about approximately 3,000 unique stars as our starting sample. Now, we looked into the archive for photometric detections of these stars in the optical infrared bands and also their distance estimates from Gaia. And from the definition we saw in the previous slides, we clearly know that the spectra of classical AB stars are not expected to show any kind of forbidden lines. Hence, we visually looked into the spectra of all these stars and we excluded any spectrum showing one or any of these forbidden lines in emission. Now, at this point, the sample that we have can contain either pre-main sequence Herbig AB stars or main sequence classical AB stars. In order to differentiate these two group of stars, we have made use of the two-mass color diagram. Now, observationally, if we compare these main sequence and pre-main sequence stars, classical AB stars infrared excess originates due to the thermal Brownstrolang emission from the circumstellar gaseous disk. Whereas in case of Herbig AB stars, in addition to the gaseous disk, dusty disk is also present, which gives rise to comparatively higher infrared color. Now, the figure on the right-hand side shows the plot between J minus H, which is H minus K color. The solid green line represents the main sequence branch and the dotted green line, the giant branch. Depending upon the infrared color criteria of H minus K greater than 0.4 mag, we separated stars that are having magnitude greater than 0.4, which are shown as red dots in this figure. And considering them to be pre-main sequence Herbig AB candidates, we excluded these stars from further analysis, which again reduced our sample from 1,300 to approximately 1,280. Now, when we looked into the spectra of these stars, we identified that some of the spectra does show helium lines strongly in absorption, which is a characteristic property of B-type stars. Now, Lamos pipeline spectral classified all these stars based on very limited number of spectral templates, which could be one of the reason why some B-type, late B-type stars could be misclassified as A. In order to remove those stars, we made use of the mild spectral library and spectral species like magnesium, calcium, higher order Balmer lines and helium lines to differentiate A-type and B-type stars. Now, from a sample of about 1,200, we were able to identify 164 A-type stars and about 930 plus B-type stars. Since we are trying to identify classical AE stars, we considered this 164 AE stars for further analysis. Now, in order to making use of the photometric magnitudes available for all of these stars, we made use of the spectral energy distribution to see how many of these stars are having high infrared excess. So for this, we compared the spectral energy distribution of our sample of CAE stars with SED median grids constructed using well-studied 50 Herbig AB stars and 21 classical AE stars identified from previous literature. This plot shows the spectral energy distribution where the red solid line denotes the SED median of classical AE stars and green solid line denotes that of Herbig AB stars. The blue lines and the red dashed line denote altogether the 164 CAE stars from the previous step. And from this figure, we can clearly see that about 5 stars are having their distribution closer to that of Herbig AB stars. There is a quite possibility that these can be young stellar objects. Now, to validate that, we made use of the LADA indices. Now, this index is determined using the slope of the infrared region in the SCD, where young stellar objects are classified into different categories. Now, since we wanted to remove young stellar objects from our sample, we found out how many stars are having their LADA index greater than minus 1.5, indicating them to be Herbig A candidates. And we found that all the 5 stars which had their distribution close to Herbig A median grids did show index greater than minus 1.5. We also made use of their V minus 12 color, and we did find these 5 stars having a really high V minus 12 color, which is closer or more than that of 3 magnitudes. Now, since considering these 5 stars to be pre-main sequence big AB stars, we removed them from further analysis, resulting in a final sample of about 159 classical AE stars. Now, from a starting sample of about 2,931 AE stars from LAMOS TR5, we were able to identify 159 new classical AE stars for the first time. In addition to the emission feature found in their spectrum, these stars also do show near and infrared excess similar to that of classical BE stars. Now, the figure on the right-hand side shows a number distribution of the classical A stars from our study with respect to their spectral subtypes. It is clearly seen that maximum number of stars belong to A0 type, and the number of stars gradually decrease as we move towards cooler subtypes, supporting whatever evidence have been provided in previous study. Now, making use of the huge amount of spectral data available in LAMOST, we looked into the H-alpha profiles of all the 159 CE stars. And we did see the H-alpha emission of all the classical AE stars comparatively weaker to that of classical B stars. It is substantiated with the second point given here that from 159, almost 140 of the stars show very weak emission and absorption. And only very small number of stars do show emission peaks. The H-alpha equivalent width of our stars range between -0.2 to 23.6 angstrom, which is comparatively lesser to that of classical B stars, which is around 40 angstrom. The figure on the right-hand side shows the distribution of the H-alpha equivalent width with respect to the spectral type. The blue dots represent classical B star H-alpha equivalent width from literature, whereas the red dots represent the H-alpha equivalent width from our present study. We can clearly see that the H-alpha equivalent width gradually decreasing as we move from B-type to A-type stars. Now, in addition to H-alpha lines, Balmer series in emission, we did also find Paschken series in emission, iron lines, oxygen lines, and calcium triplet lines in emission. Now, the surprising aspect is iron lines are mostly found in emission in case of classical BE stars. But this iron emission is expected to fade away as we move beyond spectral type B5. It's very surprising that we notice some stars in a sample showing iron emission lines. These small number of stars do need a specific comparative analysis with classical BE stars to understand the line formation mechanism and the line formation regions also. And in case of calcium triplet lines, calcium triplet lines are generally require low ionization temperatures, and A-type stars being comparatively cooler than that of B-type.
Anusha, you have 3 minutes only.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. We expect more number of classical AE stars to show calcium triplet lines in emission, but surprisingly, we observed the fraction of CAE stars showing emission, which is very low, around 10%, compared to that of CBE stars, which is around 15 to 25%. So these are some of the observational aspects we were able to do, making the best use of the LAMOS low resolution spectra. And to conclude our study, we identified 159 classical AE stars for the first time in the spectral range A0 to A4. And this is the first time we characterize these stars and compare them with the properties of classical BE stars. The spectral type, the number of stars gradually decreased from A0 towards cooler subtypes as we expected from previous studies. The emission feature and the strength does decrease as we move towards cooler subtypes. It is surprising to identify metallic iron and oxygen lines in their spectra, as they are expected to fade away, and they are not expected to be present in the spectra of CAE stars. And the fraction of classic calcium 2 triplet lines in emission was low compared to that of CBE stars, which was surprising. So these observational aspects do need further detailed study, and I would like to conclude saying that our study specifically aims to motivate the BE star community to look into classical AE stars in order to understand the BE phenomena in general. Yeah. I thank you all for your attention, and is there any questions?
Thank you, Anusha. So if you have any question, please raise your hands. Yeah, seems to be no hand raised. Okay. So I have a question that then you have a range of emission line in the AE stars of HL5 emission lines that is
Right,
equivalent
yes.
with 0.2 to goes to
Equivalent
minus,
with, yeah.
yeah, minus 23. So
Yeah.
do you have absorption there?
Yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, you're asking about absorption
Yeah,
feature.
what I mean is that they may have field in emission kind of things.
Yes, yes. We have corrected for that absorption component using
Okay.
model spectra also. So whatever value I've given here is the equivalent with corrected for that absorption.
Okay, okay, okay. Okay, thank you. If not any question, then thank you, Anusha.
Yeah.
And I thank all the speakers for their nice contribution to this session. And more thanks that they will be well in time. Most all the speakers are well in time. So many thanks for this. To this, I would like to close this session and hand over to Dipanchan or Kumtal.
Yes, we are here, so we have no further announcement.
Okay.
So we can then close the session then.
Yeah, we'll close the session. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the speakers and all participants.